Today we're at the Panzermuseum Munster and we take a look at guidelines from September 1943 by Flak-Regiment 43 on how to engage tanks, but also to how to provide ground support, and particularly the various duties of the light AA and the heavy AA, so the 20mm flak guns and the 88mm flak guns.
Let's look at the general principles first, before we look at air defense and finally anti-tank combat. General principles note: all experience gained to date, both in attack, defense and retreat, has clearly shown that anti-aircraft artillery only achieves the full effective impact of its weapons in operational employment where, first, it was deployed in a concentrated manner, second, the characteristics of anti-aircraft weapons and their potential effects were correctly recognized not only by the anti-aircraft artillery officers, but also in particular by army formations, and the employment was carried out accordingly with clearly defined orders. This applies to both ground combat and air defense tasks. As usual, the importance of mutual understanding of the different arms is noted. The next section is about air defense. It is noted that the enemy was capable of achieving surprises due to regularly changing his attack patterns. Yet despite this, it is crucial that the AA guns are concentrated, else the chance of downing enemy planes is too low. As such, it is required that the flak unit is deployed as a battalion in a very small area, even without regard to combat detachments or army section borders, and also adapts flexibly to enemy attack tactics. Based on this, a number of specific measures were suggested. For the heavy battery, so the ones with the 88mm flak, the distance between the guns should be at most 40 to 50 meters, which is about 130 to 160 feet. For the light batteries, so the 20mm flak, the distance within the platoons should be at most 100 meters or 328 feet, and between the platoons at most 1500 meters, which is about 4,920 feet. Sadly, the report does not provide the authorized strength for the different units, and the sizes changed over the course of the war. Also, there were different types of batteries, mobile and static. Thanks to Dennis from the Axis History Forum, he noted that the towed heavy battery consisted of 4 88mm flak and 3 20mm flak for late 1943, according to the Table of Organization and Equipment. A light flak platoon, according to another source, consisted of 3 20mm flaks usually. Note that static heavy batteries could have an authorized strength of 6 or even 8 guns, but these were generally not used on the front line, at least not in 1943. Additionally, keep in mind that army flak units, Heeresflak, had different organizations. In terms of engaging enemy aircraft, it is noted that all batteries and light platoons must concentrate all their guns on one aircraft, particularly the one which was considered to be the greatest threat. The next point was about avoiding friendly fire and how to deal if friendly fighter planes joined the fray. In order to achieve greater effectiveness of the light 20mm and medium 37mm anti-aircraft guns and to avoid firing on our own fighters, it is ordered that as soon as lagging fire is detected during the fire bursts of the fire, the next shots are to be brought in front of the target by vigorous correction by the gun commanders or gunners. The burst of fire must not exceed 3, at most 5 shots. In addition to observing the enemy aircraft in combat, the movements of our own fighters must also be observed with the utmost attention. This is primarily the task of the tactical shooter, the platoon leader, who must energetically and flexibly control the fire of his platoon and direct it according to his observations. As far as personnel allow, special observers should also be assigned to observe your own fighters. As soon as it is recognized that our own fighters are preparing to attack within the effective range of the enemy weapons, fire on the enemy target in question must be adjusted in good time or directed so far ahead of it that the danger to our own fighters is largely eliminated. In case of large daylight attacks, it is noted that the fire should be opened at a maximum range. Additionally, the targets should be switched, so planes that have dropped their bomb loads should no longer be engaged unless there were no other targets left. If a mixed group of aircraft, namely fighter, ground attack planes like the IL-2 and bombers attacked, the primary targets were the multi-engine planes. In case of an attack of fighters and ground attack planes, the focus is on the ground attack planes. About the location of the firing positions, it is noted: The positions must be chosen in such a way that the enemy cannot see them from the ground and at the same time it is possible to defend against any tanks that may break through. As a rule, the distance from the main line of resistance must be at least 5 to 6 km. In case of light weapons, if the terrain permits and the situation requires it, it may be necessary to move closer to the main line of resistance in exceptional cases. This will always be the case when the enemy attacks our own front lines with stronger ground attack plane formations. This fact must also be regarded as a sign of greater enemy attack intentions on the ground. In such cases, it will be necessary to move the heavy anti-aircraft batteries forward to the prepared anti-tank barrier positions. The batteries are therefore already taking all the measures and making all the preparations necessary for a quick and smooth transition to anti-tank defense, loading of anti-tank ammunition, provision of vehicles, etc. It is also noted that firing positions should be well camouflaged against air and ground spotting. Before we take a look at the anti-tank combat guidelines, we look at how an 88mm flak was set up for towing and how it would be deployed.
And now we take a look how the flak gun would be deployed in combat. So as you can see here we have the wheels. So this was a special trailer for this flak gun. And it could be fired in emergencies from the driving position. But now I will show you how it would be more or less deployed and what important elements would fix the gun to the ground. Now here's the gun basically in its mobile position. Now it's in a cross mount, and basically you have two elements, the one on the left and the right, which you can switch down, and they have additional spikes here on the side to dig into the ground. So when it's fully deployed, it's very secure on the ground, and you would remove the front and the back wheel parts of the trailer, which were individually mounted here. And for the gun shield, this was initially not part of every gun, and also later not on every gun. You could move these elements for movement, and also to a certain degree for reducing the profile as well. And then you have the various positions, which I'll explain in another video.
So let us take a look at the anti-tank combat section of the Luftwaffe report. It starts out with general principles as well. It is noted that the enemy uses its tanks only very carefully, and that terrain that is well prepared against tank attacks is avoided. Tank attacks used mass tanks of at least 20 tanks, but up to 100 to 200 tanks. According to the report, the enemy probed the front lines in various ways. After carefully probing the main line of resistance and presumably also conducting aerial reconnaissance with low-flying ground attack planes, the enemy always advanced where they suspected there were few anti-tank weapons and where the security line was particularly weak in terms of infantry. There they used their armored forces only briefly to roll up the main line of resistance, then immediately withdrew them and left the rest of the attack to their infantry, which they supported very well with artillery fire from their tanks' reverse slope positions. They did not usually attack sections of the front where anti-aircraft guns were positioned immediately behind the main line of resistance as an anti-tank barrier position. Successful attacks, according to the report, were often achieved in the following way. The enemy basically baited the anti-tank weapons at a maximum distance of up to 1,800 meters with singular tanks. Once the anti-tank weapons opened fire, massed fire from artillery, mortars and tanks would engage the anti-tank positions. After these were neutralized, the full-scale tank assault was conducted. Based on those experiences, various conclusions were derived. Concentrated employment of several anti-aircraft combat groups in confined spaces, 4 88-centimeter guns and 6 2-centimeter guns per group, where a stronger enemy tank attack was imminent. The use of individual 8.8-centimeter guns is strictly prohibited. This is very similar to the employment guidelines for tanks, which generally prohibited them to be employed alone as well. In terms of positioning, it is noted that the flak combat groups should be positioned in the depth of the main defensive area, the Hauptkampffeld, hence at least 2 to 3 kilometers behind the outpost line, vorderste Sicherungslinie. Ideally, the positions are not visible to the enemy and outside of the range of its light mortars. Distinctive landmarks like a group of trees or houses should be avoided, since the enemy looks there for anti-tank defenses first. Every battery must have alternate positions, and these must be reachable under cover. These alternate positions have to be used once the current position is definitely known to the enemy, but a change in position during a tank attack is prohibited. The gun positions should allow for interlocking fields of fire and ideally have a firing arc of 360 degrees. The next point is about the use of Soviet silent tanks and guns. These are weapons that were well camouflaged and only open fire in special circumstances, for instance when the enemy crossed a certain line, usually in defense. In this case, though, these weapons would fire once an anti-tank position was positively identified. To counter this, the report suggests to employ silent guns as well, ideally in a flanking position that only would engage once all enemy tanks were engaged. To prevent the premature identification of anti-tank positions, it was prohibited to engage enemy infantry targets with heavy weapons out of an anti-tank position, unless the position was attacked by infantry without tanks. In this case, it was recommended to use light flak platoons nearby, offset to the side of the main position. Only if these guns didn't manage to hold off the enemy infantry alone, the heavy guns should join in the defense against the infantry. In order to deal with enemy bait tanks, Lokpanzer, that should draw the fire, it is suggested to have one overwatch gun that is ideally placed as much forward as possible of the main position, while still being able to coordinate with the other guns. Furthermore, it is noted, light anti-aircraft guns should never be used for anti-tank defense, even in most threatening situations. Where light anti-aircraft guns without armor-piercing weapons are located and an enemy breakthrough is imminent, the light anti-aircraft guns must immediately change position, with subsequent notification to the battalion, so that under no circumstances will weapons be lost, either through enemy action or through necessary demolition. This is in contrast to the heavy flak guns. Even if the enemy has broken through and friendly infantry is retreating, heavy anti-aircraft artillery must remain in position without express orders from the battalion or advice from the responsible army section commander. And in addition to holding back our own infantry, must fight the enemy with all means until they are destroyed. The battery also must refrain from retreating, since it will always happen too late in such cases. It is noted that the battery commanders are responsible that infantry commanders provide them with infantry support, in case there are not enough Luftwaffe soldiers available. These soldiers are backed by light flak platoons. The next point deals with the limitations of the flak guns and friction with army personnel. Heavy anti-aircraft guns, with their high rate of fire and poor mobility, taking at least 15 to 20 minutes to set up under good conditions, must always form the last line of the anti-tank barrier positions. Once this realization has finally sunk in, especially among army units, heavy anti-aircraft guns will always be truly effective backbone of the anti-tank defense in all situations. It is added that other forms of employment led to a total disaster, as the experience of the last months has clearly shown. In these cases, Flak could not provide any meaningful support to all of the army units while suffering losses. Such a weapon as heavy anti-aircraft artillery is too valuable to be used solely as moral support for the infantry. The final paragraph is about the cooperation and limits between the Luftwaffe and the army. The battery commander are instructed that these principles are to be followed and that urgent wishes by the army that go against these principles are to be denied. The paragraph closes with, I would also like to point out once again that on the orders of the Reichsmarschall Göring, there is under no circumstances to be any subordination of anti-aircraft units fighting within army formations to any army formation. Fundamentally, anti-aircraft units are solely ordered to cooperate. Army departments are therefore not authorized to issue any operational orders.
Thank you to the Panzermuseum Munster for inviting me. Thank you to my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar. Thank you to Tobias and Andy for helping out. Thank you for watching and see you next time.